Today's symposium is intended to accomplish two things: to offer an overview of what's been going on in the very active field of research on brownstone preservation in the last several years, and to disseminate the results of our attempts to develop new techniques to conserve decaying brownstone as part of our 2004 tower restoration. For their support of today's meeting, I want to thank the National Park Service and its daughter organization, NCPTT, the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training, for their very generous grant which made the symposium possible. I also want to thank Consigli Construction Company for its generous gift which underwrote last night's reception at the mansion. The symposium was organized in conjunction with APT Northeast Chapter, who helped immeasurably to publicize it. Thank you. Also, as co-sponsors, we were helped by AIA Maine, Greater Portland Landmarks, the Maine Historic Preservation Commission, and Maine Preservation. Finally, I want especially to thank Ethan Meijer, who volunteered so much time and advice as we were organizing this event. Thank you, Ethan. Now, I've been assigned only a few minutes to give context to today's presentation, and I want to talk about two things. First, why this site, not this site of course, but Victoria Mansion, is so important and why we lavish so much attention on it. And second of all, I want to talk about the history of our attempts to deal with what we've always called the brownstone problem. Victoria Mansion, you're seeing it on screen here, also known as the Morse Libby House, is a rare intact survivor of mid-19th century America. It was built and furnished between 1858 and 1860 on the eve of the Civil War, so it's comparatively early for an American Victorian house. The building itself is an architectural gem, an iconic example of the Italian villa style designed by architect Henry Austin of New Haven. Inside are superb interiors designed by Gustav Herder, founder of the famous Herder Brothers firm of New York City. Herder Brothers were the most important interior designers for a quarter century, from 1858 to about 1882. Victoria Mansion is Gustav Herder's first commission, and curiously is the only Herder firm commission that survives largely intact today. Contributing to the interiors are the decorative paintings by Giuseppe Guidicini, which cover walls and ceilings throughout the house. Truly over 1,000 square yards of painted decoration of the highest quality made in America in the 19th century. More than 90% of the original furnishings of the house are still there, including whole suites of furniture designed by Gustav Herder and manufactured in his New York workshop. This is Herder's great cabinet in the reception room. We also have original carpets and textiles, various artworks, fabulous gas lighting fixtures still in their original setting with the original globes, and we have many of the small objects for daily use like porcelain and silver. Remarkable, too, is the unity and consistency of these elements. The interiors were created and furnished all at one moment, and with one mind in control, so that all the parts fit together into one harmonious whole. Each of the elements in the equation here, building, coordinated interiors, painted decorations, and original collections, lends importance and context to the other parts. The fact that all the elements survived together and were the best available in America at the time is what makes this site so important and such a rare document of American life and aspirations at mid-century. Now, the rarity and complexity of the site has everything to do with how we treat the building, and I want to make 3 points about that. First of all, we consider the site holistically, where the parts are inseparable. The exterior of the building can't be considered apart from the interiors, just can't be. Obviously, when we deal with the building, we live by the Secretary of the Interior Standards, but we also live by the recommendations of the New Orleans Charter for Joint Preservation of Historic Structures and Artifacts, which recognizes the complexity of dealing with historic buildings and original objects together. Second point, the importance and fragility of the interiors drove much of what we did on the tower. Safety was the most important issue, of course. We had flaking stone which threatened the public. But we were also growing anxious about the interiors. We already had leaks, and we didn't know how long the deteriorating stone would be an effective weather envelope. Further, we demanded at every stage during the construction that the means and methods had to be worked out to safeguard the interiors at every time. Third point, we consider the building itself to be a museum object. We treat it with the same care that we give to other objects in the collection, which means that we give it conservation level attention. That's why we took such efforts to preserve original material, even developing new conservation treatments to save the coin. Now, a brief history of our attempts to address what I've called the brownstone problem. The house was only lived in by two families, the Morses and Libbys. The Libbys moved out in the late 1920s, and the house was unoccupied for almost a decade, already an issue right there. It became a museum in 1941, operated by the Victoria Society of Maine Women of Achievement. They were enthusiastic and dedicated, but they were desperately underfunded. And for the next 30 years, from the 40s till the early 70s, the building spiraled downward, reaching a low point by the early 70s. The turning point didn't come until federal funds for historic preservation became available, which allowed the museum to bring in Morgan Phillips of SPNEA. Andy Ladigo, who's one of our presenters today, worked alongside Morgan during those early campaigns. In 1973, Phillips conducted a survey of the site, and he commissioned photographs which show how far down it had come. They're also wonderful for me to see because it reminds me how far we've come along. Here we see the front parlor porch, constructed of brownstone, badly decayed. It was an active safety hazard in danger of collapse. 1973 again. This is the back of the L. The porches on the back of the building were originally built of wood, not of stone, but of wood, which was sand painted to look like stone. You see how badly decayed the porch was because of lack of paint maintenance and chronic roof leaks. We've come a long way since then. Now, Phillips' survey established just a few critical priorities. Water management was a key issue. The roof was leaking, and he found the gutters and downspouts in complete failure. The brownstone was deteriorating. Exterior woodwork was badly decayed. The mastic was flaking off the L. You see it here in this photograph. And there was some general deterioration of the decorative painting inside the building. It's a short triage list of urgent interventions needed to save a patient in critical condition. Phillips began an intensive series of restorations which are documented in his Report on Restoration Work, 1973 to 1977, published by the National Park Service. It's a famous little book that was taught in preservation programs for years, and it may still be. Here we see an example of the cornice during restoration. This is his first campaign. He also worked at restoring porches right away in the first 2 years. Phillips' restorations show meticulous attention to recording. You see each individual piece of wood given a number. And a great emphasis on preserving original fabric whenever that was possible. Rotted wood was stabilized with epoxies. New pieces were patched in only when necessary. Nevertheless, in this case, much of the crown molding had to be cut from new redwood. Such work was a model for the period. Now, while projects like that emphasize the preservation of original fabric, another project involves a complete restoration, or a complete reconstruction. The side L porch had been removed at some unrecorded time. It's just not there in this photograph, the 73 survey photograph. And there it is under construction. Using physical evidence in a single photograph, Phillips reconstructed the porch. The fact that such a reconstruction was among the earliest projects completed on the building, I find very interesting, while there were so many crises still going on. And I think it shows that both Phillips and the Maine Historic Preservation Commission, which was awarding the federal grant, put a high value not just on saving original fabric, but also on restoring the architectural coherence and legibility of the building. That's going to be a recurring theme today, the balance between preserving original material and recapturing the original form of the building. We put huge emphasis on saving original material here, but for the site to be an accurate evocation of past life, which is what a historic house museum is all about, it has to have the overall form. Both are aspects of authenticity, the authenticity of each part versus the authenticity of the whole. Essentially, it's the balance between preservation and restoration that I'm talking about, and sometimes you can't have both. While Phillips was engaged in the large woodwork repairs, he was investigating what to do about the brownstone. The front porches were the critical issue. Here you see the front parlor porch in 1977 with the roof shored up by massive timbers. Phillips' preference was to replicate the porch in stone. He largely ruled out the possibility of using Portland brownstone because of its obvious failings, and because the quarry in Portland, Connecticut was closed. He searched the world for a suitable replacement stone that would look the same as Portland brownstone but would be more durable. He didn't find one. In the end, he elected to use a replacement material. The use of sand-painted wood for the back porches provided the justification to replicate the front porches in wood. Overall, I think this treatment was highly successful. You can hardly tell that the porches aren't stone from the street, and wood was far cheaper than stone, which made it an affordable solution for the museum at that time. Now, it's interesting that Phillips didn't seriously consider sources of salvage stone, and I think this indicates an essential hang-up about brownstone, which Phillips felt was inherently flawed. His idea was to find something similar but better, And even if he didn't think this way, it would have been suicide for him to suggest to the people running the museum that he was going to rebuild it using the same imperfect material. People here have always wished that the original builders had had the foresight to build a good Maine granite instead of that brown stuff from away. An important part of our dealing with the brownstone problem was to get over this hang-up. We had to learn to understand and love brownstone. When I came here, people would say that the building was built wrong because all the ashlar is face-bedded. I should say briefly, by face-bedding I mean that that's when stone is installed on the building with the bedding planes of the sedimentary stone laid vertical and parallel to the building face. That's the upper illustration. You'll note even from this illustration taken from the HSR, it suggests that naturally bedded as below is preferable. We're trying to get past that thinking. In fact, brownstone is a defining feature of the building. This is the only private house we know of that Austin had the opportunity to build with stone. The expensive exterior establishes the luxurious character of the house already from the outside. On the west elevation, which is comparatively intact, you see how thoughtfully Austin used the stone. The aesthetic of the building is one of expanses of sheer, smooth ashlar played against boldly carved enrichment. Further, the stone is used like a figured veneer. I don't know if you can see from way back there the wonderful swirled texture of the stone. It's important to understand that the swirled graining of brownstone is only developed when it's used in the face-bedded orientation. The tight joints contribute to this aesthetic as well. So it's the contrast between the smooth ashlar panels with their rich graining and the deep foliate carving that's of interest here, and it's very similar to what's found inside on occasion. This is the newel post of the main stair. Burled wood veneers contrasted with deep carving. The point I want to make is that the building is constructed like a piece of fine furniture, and it was done so thoughtfully and intentionally. The building is all about brownstone. The material is inextricably bound up with its meaning. The next assault on the brownstone problem came with the 1989 Historic Structure Report by Ann Bea Associates. The study included a stone-by-stone survey of the entire building by Building Conservation Associates. 50% of all stones on the building showed deterioration, and 30% they felt needed replacement. That was in 1988, the survey was done. Since the quarries were still closed, Ann Bea developed a plan to harvest material from the building itself, using the thick stones covering the basement, which they calculated could be cut into enough ashlars to reface the entire building. Again, it was BCA that conducted a pilot project, and this was 88 as well, to test that concept. One stone was removed from the basement. You see that going on here, being loaded onto a truck. You see how thick the basement stones are. That was recut into 14 ashlars, which were used to reface the southeast corner of the building. Here's the pilot project area. They also replaced one jamb of the window and two of the console brackets. The one in the photograph there is one of the ones replaced with cast stone. Then the basement block itself had to be replaced with a block of cast stone, which was created on site. The newly cut ashlars were beautifully and meticulously done, and the work is weathering well. You can see it today if the clouds part. But the cast stone doesn't stand up to close inspection. The basement block has faded badly in recent years. The window frame elements have kept their color, but the casting is fuzzy, and the color and texture are muddy and unappealing. In this case, the replacement with another material was not successful. Now, the HSR sketched out plans to replace all the ashlar on the building in phased campaigns, along with electrical wiring, fire protection, and critical interior conservation. Then they planned over the next 5 years we would restore all the rooms in the house, and all of that would be done for the estimated price tag of $4 million. This is late 80s. The most striking thing, perhaps, of all about the HSR is that that's where things stopped. Nothing happened. Didn't go forward. I think the price tag was just overwhelming and unrealistic for this little museum, but I can't help thinking that the solution of harvesting the building itself to save it, like Saturn devouring his children, doomed the proposal. So that was 1988. Then in 1996, things turned. We commissioned a CAP assessment, and this was the turning point, really. The building portion was conducted by engineer Michael Henry, who raised concerns about the condition of the tower and especially the belvedere. Could it withstand hurricanes and earthquakes, both of which we do have here in coastal Maine? The reopening of the brownstone quarries in the early 90s also provided the pretext for another study. New stone was available now. That's the Getty report cover. We applied for and received the Getty planning grant to undertake a broad study of the brownstone problem. The Getty study, which took place in 2000, included structural analysis, climatic studies, and laboratory analysis of the stone. George Wheeler designed the testing program. A new survey of the tower, so this was 12 years after the 1988 survey, showed substantially worsening conditions. You see it here shortly before we began the restoration. The Getty study urged that we needed to address it immediately, and that led to the Save America's Treasures grant and the 2004 restoration project. Here's an image of the top part of the tower after the restoration. You're going to hear much more about that project throughout the day, but in a nutshell, we removed most of the stone from the top down to the level of the porch roof. We saved and reused every stone that could be saved, but most of the ashlar was replaced with new stone from the Portland brownstone quarries. The coins were left in place and were the subject of intense conservation treatments in situ. You see, by the way, the original coins, they're darker against the background of lighter new stone. The team that designed that effort was led by architect David Fixler. Marie Ennis, who I think is in the audience today, I haven't seen Marie yet, yes she is, was the engineer. They were assisted by Ivan Meiter, who designed the conservation program, drawing on the best practice at home and abroad, and also on the growing understanding of the chemistry and physics of brownstone, much of which was being driven forward by George Wheeler and George Scherer. We reached out to Frank Matero at the University of Pennsylvania to undertake laboratory testing of the new treatments. Frank was going to be a presenter today, you know, but unfortunately he could not make it at the last minute. But we had always planned to have the skilled graduate student John Glavin here, and he's expanded his talk to cover some of the material that Frank was going to present, along with his own material. The planning team developed a small, rigorously selected list of contractors who would be invited to do the work, and Consigli Construction Company won the project through a competitive bid in January 2004. Matt Tonello is here representing Consigli. We purchased new brownstone for the project from Mike Meehan in the Portland brownstone quarries. And finally, some 30 years after he worked here with Morgan Phillips, architectural conservator Andrew Latigo returned to perform the stone treatment. I've just outlined the list of presenters for the day. I don't know if you noticed that. And now to look briefly to the future, we are planning a second phase of work involving the brownstone steps at the base of the tower. The stone fabrication is planned for the summer and construction next spring. The stair is going to be dismantled and rebuilt. Damaged stone will be repaired or replaced. The balustrades and the massive handrails that were removed in the 1980s will be recreated, and we'll also carve replicas of the fantastical urns bursting with clusters of fruit. Your comments today may have an impact on how we go forward with that project. Now, our first speaker is David Fixler. I want to point out that there are short bios of all the speakers in your registration packet. We are on a tight schedule, so introductions are going to be minimal today. David is the principal of Einhorn Yaffe Prescott in their Boston office, and he was the lead architect on the project. His talk is entitled Material, Intent, and the Aesthetics of Conservation. We're saving questions.